Right, well, before I launch into what might be just a longer speech, Seb Barlow has sent a message for us all. And forgive me, it's not an expression I'm used to, but I'll give it a go. Ah, lad. We tried calling earlier this morning to wish you the best of luck, but in typical Dring fashion, your phone battery had run out. We are so sorry we can't be there to celebrate with you today, but the late baby arrival has meant that she needs taking care of more than you do today. We wish Jill and yourself all the best in your new married world and wish you every happiness for the future. Love you loads, man. Man hugs. Matt and Sarah. Right, my bit. Right. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Evening. Allow me to introduce myself to those who don't know me. My name is Dino, and unlike many of the best men you've probably encountered over the years, who have either known their best men from old school friend days or childhood friends, Neil and I actually met about 10 years ago when we were working for the same company. In fact, it's rather amazing that we've become such good friends, given the relatively few occasions back then that Neil actually bothered turning up for work. Now, I'm not an experienced public speaker, so I find it easier to read this speech word for word. In fact, I've practiced it almost daily for about 2 weeks now, so that I know it really, sort of word for word. It's a tip that I read in a book about public speaking. I've also been drinking profusely for the last 2 hours, and that's kind of a tip I made up myself earlier. But seriously, I have to say, the bride does look absolutely amazing.
Oh.
You look, I mean, this isn't here, but you look coming down that massive smile. Lovely. So, and you've got, it's, well, I'm sure you'll agree with me, gentlemen, that today is a very sad day for single men, as another beauty has left the available list. But ladies, I'm sure that you'll agree as well that today is passing by without much of a ripple. But as my first manly duty, this is going to take a long time. As my first manly duty, I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Neil and his new wife for sharing a special day today, for helping eat, drink and dance them through 20,000 quid's worth of their hard-earned cash, and ensuring that they begin their married life in debt. Their eyeballs. But having duly accepted the honour of being the best man, I spent a long time wondering how to describe Neil. With the respect due to a man on his wedding day, I mean, how to strike the right note of sincerity, praise and warmth. I mean, you see, Neil is a man who really, truly defies a description. I could speak about him for an hour. I mean, don't worry, I'm not going to. But when I'd be finished, I'd be no closer to grasping the essence of this dear friend of mine. And yet, miraculously, he can be neatly summed up with one single internationally recognised hand gesture. As I mentioned, Neil and I first met at work. Neil had used his family connections to get him his first big break in Manchester. And as he's alluded to, little did I know that I would soon shoulder Neil's job-finding responsibility for the best part of the next decade. I was, you could say, his mentor, his guide to all things event and sales. He had to know that database management, 5 AM starts and blowing up party balloons was just as important as my champagne networking and hobnobbing with footballers in glitterati. I told him, Neil, this will all be yours too. I mean, he's still waiting, but I'm sure of it. Despite working with celebrities and launching global products and even touring with Kerrang, probably the biggest event to happen to Neil during our time at Out There events was Euro 2004.
Oh,
with the,
here we go.
With his beloved England being, well, pretty shit, Neil saw the light and threw himself into the bosom of the magical Greek team of the tournament. His loyalty to players, his willingness to be, alongside me, the only other person in England arguing that good football was played, sort of proved that there was some wisdom under the hair after all. Alas, the good times out there had to come to an end. I left, I moved on for pastures new. But Neil, he couldn't keep away from me. Calling me, emailing me, texting me. Something sort of said he missed me. So what could I do? I found a role selling music magazines. And there was an opening for a bright, fresh-faced, enthusiastic subscriptions manager. We couldn't find one, so after 4 solid years of hard graft, including trips to Cannes, LA, New York, Toronto, Montreal, it was again time for me to move on. Move to an international city of great beauty, of great renown, a city of culture, heritage, a must-see city on the lips of any international traveller. Luck would have it, for Neil, that my marketing manager resigned on my first day, leaving again an opening.
What's the affection?
Where could I find a desperate, cheap marketing manager who wouldn't mind leaving the bright lights of Manchester for the outskirts of Toxteth? It's safe to say that if the locals were confused by a Greek mank turning up on the scene, you can imagine their expressions when a marketing manager turns up, purporting to be Scouse, hailing from Southport but living in Manchester. It was always a recipe for disaster. Our relationship, though, has not always been work-related. There have been some fun times, too. Five-a-side power league and hit the bar. No cheers? No cheers? There's not one hit the bar. There's a team over there.
That was sympathy,
Many a frozen night was spent in deepest, darkest Stockport with wails and shouts of hit that and movement could be heard for miles around. Such iconic Dring shouts were almost always followed up by a fling in the arms, a pout, and dare I say it, a small stamp of the feet, as the ball went sailing miles over the protective fencing and into some old deer's backyard.
I just couldn't get the service though.
He's reading my speech. Of course, it was always someone else's poor pass. Watching football with Neil, though, is no more easier than playing. You'd think it would be, but it isn't. As I'm sure you can all imagine, it's hard for a Southport lad supporting Liverpool to watch footy in the heart of Manchester. It has become easier, though, with the steady downward trajectory Liverpool are perfecting since 2000. Going from second to seventh, with a nice brief lift to sixth, and then back to the prime standing with eighth. Despite having to deal with supporting a struggling team, though, until now, you might think this fellow Dring has had a blokey luxury life of football, boozing, foreign trips, and you'd be right. He has, in more recent years, been the subject of a good deal of feminisation. Never more so than his arrival on the scene in Chorlton. Would a flat do for Neil? Would a small house do for Neil? Or even maybe a loft conversion? Oh no, Neil went cottage. I didn't realise Neil had a thing for cottaging, but there you go. Now don't get me wrong, I don't place Neil's feminisation at Neil's doorstep. But as Neil's penchant for metrosexual hairdos, tight-ankled, low-swinging jeans, and slim Jim ties bear testament to, he has been, for some time now, a gentleman. In fact, quite frankly, it amazes me, he hasn't just changed his name to Tarquin, started wearing pink and taken up playing the medieval Gaelic harp. Long gone are the days of Cisco, Erica Badu and Maxwell. It's more Michael Bublé, Jamie Callum and James Morrison. A fairly short affair was had with the cottage once Neil found himself at odds with a neighbour over bush trimming. We all knew it was a time for him to move on. Now, it might be a good time to point out that Neil, now 30, married, with a cat and a mortgage, likes to think of himself as younger than the rest of us, with supremely youthful looks and attributes. This notion, though, has been duly obliterated over the last year, as many of his mates can pay testament to, with conversations involving fixing the dishwasher, going to IKEA, babysitting said cat, to choosing the right coloured Pantones and incidental lighting for his front room. But now married, he must think this finally proves it's all sorted. However, I understand from good sources now that Neil has taken to wearing women's clothing during the day. Thank God for the stag party. Now, you've heard a bit about this stag party already, so traditionally what goes on stag stays on stag. Personally though, I've never really been one for tradition. So rather than try and explain to you what went on and how beautiful Neil looked in his skinny, figure-hugging miniskirt kombucha combo, I thought it might be right to bring it you in full colour, glossy print. So, please feel free. Where shall I start that one? Please feel free. Oh, there is a pen as well if you want to make notes.
Annotate.
Actually, pen's in there. If you could just, it's in my inside. The rules of Staggy, get a shot lad, and Strippy will know engraved in the minds of the 21 Staggerati for years to come. But I have absolutely, truthfully have to tell you that Neil is exactly the kind of guy everyone would love to have as his friend. Or their son, and yes, even their son-in-law. Even despite his often feisty ways, his big hair, his penchant for Chorlton Green and non-premium lager. He's a great guy. A guy who always makes time for you. A guy that if he only had £1 left in the world, he would give it you. This, I must add though, is still untested today. Still doesn't have £1 to give anyone. But joking aside, you could not have married a finer man. A better looking man, but not a fine. And Jill's family, you should feel only happiness in joining forces with Neil's family. After all, this wedding has given me the opportunity to meet many of Neil's relatives for the first time. And despite what he's been saying, I think you're all right.
You're a brave boy.
Thank you very much. Now, before I toast a happy couple and draw this woeful speech to a close, I would like to wish the new Mr. and Mrs. Dring the very best for their future journey together. And I hope, when you look back from years from now, on this their wedding day, that they realise that this day was the day that they loved each other the least.
How's a compliment?
So,
That was a compliment. That was a compliment.
we'll do it again. And I hope when they look back years from now, this their wedding day, they realise that this day was the day they loved each other the least.
Ah, yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding. Raise your glasses to my very best friend.